Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you for taking the time to dial in to spend the next hour or so with the Oxford MBA recruitment and admission team and our esteemed faculty member. Now, before we get started, and as a few more people are trickling in here, I want to ensure that the audio is working well on your end. So if you can hear me loud and clear, please type yes on the chat box. Okay, great. Yes, sounds good. Yes, yes. Okay, perfect. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Misha Ragona, and I'm one of the recruitment and admission managers for the Oxford MBA. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Samantha White, who is the marketing manager.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So Sam and I will both be moderating the session today, so you can expect to hear from us throughout. The webinar today is the first in a series of faculty-led MBA-style webinars. The purpose of the event is to give you a preview to some MBA content, the faculty that teach at Oxford, and some of their research. The session will be interactive, so when prompted, please do submit your questions and answers to the chat box. I would ask that you keep your questions to the lecture topic and materials and refrain from asking specific questions about the program or admission details. We have a very diverse audience, actually around 300 registered today, some looking at the MBA in the next 1 to 2 years, some offer holders, some enrolled students, and some still exploring if an MBA is the right path for you. In an effort to keep the session relevant to all, please again email specific questions to the address listed on the slide, and a member of the team will respond to you directly. So on to the main event. We are delighted to have Anette Mikes with us today to share a case study and some thought-provoking material for the current COVID-19 situation. Anette Mikes is a professor of accounting at Oxford Saïd and a fellow at Hartford College. Annette was the 2017 laureate of the prestigious ACA Prize of the University of St. Gallen for her contributions to the field of risk management and financial governance. Between 2014 and 2019, she was a professor at HSA Lausanne, teaching risk management, management control, and accounting for sustainability. Formerly at Oxford Harvard Business School, she launched the Harvard Executive Education Program, Risk Management for Corporate Leaders. So with that quick introduction, I'd like to hand it over to Anette Mikes to get the discussion started.
Thank you very much, Misha and Sam, for that generous introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to share a few research ideas with you, perhaps research insights, and try to bring those to bear relevance on the unusual and very uncertain situations that we are finding ourselves in, all of us, I think, who are on this webinar at this moment. As you can see, I gave a rather long title to this lecture to enable me to talk about a number of things. I decided to talk about crisis leadership because this is something that takes us to real MBA territory, and it's very, very relevant at the moment. The thesis I would like to put in front of you, though, is a little bit of a different view of leadership from what might be called a traditional view. So for us, at the time of crisis, leadership is not particularly directive. It's not overly authoritative, and it hasn't necessarily got a plan to execute. In crisis type situations, leadership is about innovation. And this is the idea I would like to discuss with you using evidence from 2 previous crises that I and my co-authors at the Harvard Business School have studied in depth. I would also like to bear some of these ideas to shed some light on the situation, on the COVID-19 situation that we are all finding ourselves in. So just to give you a few building blocks that we are going to play with today, we're going to think about the specifics of crisis situations. These specifics are there, whether we are talking about a submarine rescue mission or rescuing miners from a Chilean mine, or talking about saving lives at the time of a global pandemic. We're going to look at in more detail the Kursk rescue mission and the case of the Chilean miners. Both of these disastrous accidents happened a long time from now. The first one 20 years ago, the second one 10 years ago. But I will argue to you that the issues that they raised, the challenges that those people faced in those situations are timeless and are still with us today. So this will give us the opportunity to talk about crisis management and the challenges for leadership, and a little bit more unpack what we mean by leading rapid innovation. But before we launch into the case studies, I would like to establish some common ground for us. Where you are sitting now, I'm sure you all have very varied situations and probably quite varying situations too. I would be very interested to know, what do you think? How long will it be till the lockdown around you ends? Do you think this is possible ending within a month? Are we talking about 1 to 2 months or longer, 3 to 5 months, or 6 months or longer? We are going to launch a poll now. Sam is going to help us with that. And we are waiting to see what you think. Sam?
Thank you, everyone. We've got lots of results coming in. I'll just give it a couple more minutes for all the responses to come through.
Yeah.
We seem to have a clear winner.
Yeah, well, it will be exciting to see. I cannot still see it on my screen, so these are nail-biting moments.
So right, we've got 84% of people have voted. I'll give it just a couple more seconds, see if anyone else hasn't voted yet, and then I'll close it off and we can have a look at the results.
Okay.
Alrighty. So these are the results. If you want to have a look at those, Annette, hopefully you can see them now.
Yeah, so we can, the majority of you, almost half of you, think that the lockdown will end in 1 to 2 months. A third of you think it will be 3 to 5 months. 13% think it will last 6 months or longer. And 8% are sitting in situations where they can see the light at the end of the tunnel within a month. My impression is that nobody can really know. We can only hope at this stage, and this is the best guess that we can give. But be aware, we probably are all applying a bit of a wishful thinking here, and there could be a little bit of optimism bias creeping into this. But anyway, I think the main thing to take away is that this crisis is going to stay with us for the foreseeable future, probably into the summer or right up to the end of the summer, according to most of us. Right, let me ask another question, again, related to the situation where we are. If you think about your organization, how is it being affected by the COVID crisis? Think about the revenue, or if you are working for a non-profit, think about the implications for funding. Is the COVID-19 impact on your organization in terms of revenue or funding as disastrous as 50% down or worse, 30 to 50% down, 10 to 20% down, or perhaps you experience little or no impact? Or it might even be that some of you are working in organizations that at the moment are able to increase their sales or funding prospects. So let's take a look. We're going to launch the poll again.
I'll give it a couple more seconds until everyone's had a chance to vote for their thought. Around 83% of you. Thank you, everyone, for being so engaged.
Thank you. Well, it looks like a quarter of you actually more than a quarter of you, about 40% of you are in dire situations when you are expecting revenues or funding to be down by a third or more, which is very worrying. Another 40% of you are thinking about a 10 to 20% revenue increase, which is basically the kind of growth prospects that the stock markets like to see being wiped out. And we have very few people, just 10% of you, who think they can weather this crisis with little or no impact. And again, a minority 10% are working in companies that are currently increasing their sales. So welcome, Amazon employees. So this is really a troubling situation. And sometimes when I feel myself being anxious and looking for a little bit of encouragement, I turn to literature. And one of my favorite authors is actually a lady who used to be a professor of philosophy at Oxford University by the name of Iris Murdoch. She also was an excellent philosopher. And she has got some interesting things to say about crisis situations, the kind of situations that we are finding ourselves in. So this is her, Oxford philosopher Iris Murdoch, reflecting on crisis. And I think we are all feeling this. Crisis induce such terrible anxiety. Why is that anxiety that we all feel? It's because they image the possibility of total and irrevocable failure. So in this sense, crises are an object lesson in what Iris called the foul contingency of life. Now, what does that foul contingency of life mean for managers? It means situations, and again, we can turn to the novelist's words. It means situations where traditional management breaks down, because traditional management processes, practices, and routines, plans, and scripts that we're trying to execute are designed for a world that is predictable, standard, and stable. And yet, philosophers have noted, and novelists have noted, that the world is full of situations where the beginning of one's actions seem to be inevitable and justified, while the ends are so completely unpredictable and unexpected, as indeed the crisis situation we are finding ourselves in. So when you're thinking about situations like this, the implication for managers is that we find ourselves in unfamiliar territory. We find ourselves in a world where the scripts that we have, the plans that we have, the strategies that we have do not work anymore. So we have to make sense of this world, and this is really the challenge of crisis and COVID-19. We have to make sense of this novel world, which is unfolding as we are trying to learn about it. Now, what does this do to the challenge of leadership? Well, let me call on another author who might be interesting for us here, and we're going to draw on his ideas throughout this presentation. This is F. Scott Fitzgerald, the American author, novelist. And he had this famous remark about a first-rate intelligence, which is a person with an ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. I can only imagine how many of you are feeling under pressure to hold completely opposed ideas and objectives and values in mind at this time, and look for some sense in all this, and basically lean to your inner strengths to be still able to retain the ability to function. This is really the hard stuff of management. We are now surrounded by multiple and opposing and conflicting values and priorities that are normally not in conflict with each other. Think about the debate about protecting lives and protecting livelihoods in the COVID world. Normally, these two priorities, these values are not in conflict with each other. However, in this day and age, they have come into a conflict with each other, and we have to manage through. And this conflict is felt in societies. Every single country that faces this virus It's felt in companies who have to think about the livelihoods of their employees, the health of their employees, and the survival of their companies. And you probably feel it in your own personal circumstances as well, as you are trying to keep yourself and your loved ones safe, but you also try to take care of your livelihoods. So with that, we're going to look into 2 case studies, and this is really important for us, but given that this is a let's give you a taste of MBA type seminar. So when you come to the business school, many courses will be drawing on case studies to acquaint you with a particular managerial problem or challenge and give you an opportunity to put yourselves in the shoes of the case protagonist and work out the responses or the insights that would have been very useful in those situations. And effectively compare and contrast what you think about the situation and its lessons with what the protagonists have felt, have reflected, and have done. So the first case study that we are going to look at is the rescue mission that unfortunately failed 20 years ago in 2000, August 2000, in the Barents Sea, where a Russian submarine tragically sank, and survivors inside this submarine were, according to all news releases, awaiting rescue. So the situation we see here, let me just give you a few facts about it, just in case you are not experts about Russian military doctrine. So Russia's Northern Fleet operated a huge military exercise in 2000 with most of its battleships out at sea. One of the nuclear submarines, which was a flagship submarine of the fleet, got into trouble during this military exercise. We're not going to go into the actual causes of the disasters. Let it be enough to say that there was a malfunctioning torpedo and an explosion in the torpedo room. And within minutes, all torpedoes in that room detonated. And again, in a minute or two, the submarine found itself at the bottom of the Barents Sea. Now, the first few compartments of the submarine were destroyed because of the explosion, taking all the lives of the sailors who were operating there. But the nuclear bulkhead, which you see about a third towards the front of the submarine, that nuclear bulkhead held, and the compartments behind that bulkhead remained intact. So the sailors who were residing in that part of the submarine survived. With hindsight, we know there were 23 of them. At the time, we didn't know how many sailors could have survived, but when the Russian military released news about the accident, they tantalizingly added that they have been in communications with the survivors using tapping methods, and they heard knocking from inside the submarine. So as far as people who were paying attention to this, as far as they were concerned, many sailors could have been alive and waiting to be rescued. Now, how difficult was this rescue challenge? Let me show you the topography of this. So the submarine was in shallow waters. That's the first thing that you should notice from this. If by some magical, super powerful lever, we would have managed to turn this submarine by 90 degrees, then a third of it would have been out of the water. So 100-meter depths doesn't count like a terribly huge depths to reside. And in fact, from the point of view of the sailors, this is a very, if you have to have an accident, this is a very fortunate position to be in, because there is a realistic chance that people, when they know where you are, can reach you. There are little submersibles in most rescue fleets that can come to a depth of 100 meters, latch onto the submarine, and establish an escape route. Okay, but inside the submarine, we have got, by hindsight, we know 23 sailors survived. One of them, a 20-year-old lieutenant captain, took charge, and they started to do what they were trained to do. They changed into their thermal clothing, and they started to do the routine processes of making sure that carbon dioxide doesn't build up too much in the air, because that was their biggest risk at that moment. They had a quick discussion whether they should attempt an ascent from the submarine to the surface of the water. It would have been a risky dive, and they decided that given that the Navy must have known where they are, it's probably safer for them to just stay put and wait to be rescued. I often think about these sailors sitting in the darkness and in that cold tube. And today, I was actually thinking about ourselves sitting in lockdown and waiting for the experts to save us. I would like to contrast this situation with the Chilean miners' predicament. This accident happened 10 years later, also on an August day in 2010. We are talking about a very old mine in Chile, where 700,000 tons of some of the hardest rock on the planet suddenly caved in at a depth of several hundred meters down. While a lot of miners who managed to escape from shallower parts of this mine clambered out of the mine pretty quickly, when they did the roll call, they found that 33 were missing. The 33 missing miners were operating at a depth of 700 meters. To give you a sense of that, we are talking about a depth of more than 2 Eiffel Tower depths, almost like 2 Empire State Building depths. And some of the hardest rock separated them from there to the surface. Now, luckily for them, there was a refuge, a mine shelter at that depth, and they were able to gather in that mine shelter. What was really difficult in this situation at the beginning is that we just didn't know whether there was anyone who could have survived that initial accident. The question I have for you, and this would be interesting to reflect on, if you were in an MBA class, you would have read the case studies already. And while you would have read these case studies, you would have probably reflected on the questions. What are the challenges that these two situations share from the point of view of those who have to carry out the rescue missions? And what are the challenges that are really unique to each of them? So as you were listening to me, you might have been thinking about, if I had been there, and don't put yourself in the shoes of the sailors or the miners now, put yourself in the shoes of the admirals who are responsible for rescuing the sailors and the mining executives who are responsible for rescuing the miners. What challenges did these people face from a leadership and crisis management perspective? I believe Sam and Misha are collecting.
Yeah, so here we're getting some comments that are coming in. So I'll just take a read through them.
Okay.
So both have an unknown number of survivors. This can make it harder to make the rescue decision. Shared challenges, isolation, remote access, limited to no scope of reaching them initially, slow response time.
Yeah.
They both require the safe rescue.
Could you repeat that again?
Both require safe rescue.
So the rescue missions themselves are perilous to the rescuers, yes?
Both have time constraint and pressure.
Very good.
The world is watching, so every decision matters.
Some of you might remember this. Both of these cases were more or less global media news for as long as they lasted.
So they also have key technical expertise needed for each situation, and some of that would be unknown.
Very good, very good. In fact, I anticipated some of these comments, and I've got a slide just summarizing some of what you have just told us. You're right, we don't know how many people there might have been surviving, but in one case, we know where they were. In fact, in both cases, we knew where they were. And the problem was we couldn't reach them, we couldn't communicate with them. But overall, it seems like the Kursk being in shallow water, that was a technically less challenging problem than the 2 Eiffel Tower or 2 Empire State Building depths that the Chilean miners found themselves in. The rescue technology for the Russian Navy was known. And even though their own rescue submersibles at the time were quite inadequate, within days of the news, they were supplied, they were offered by the adequate equipment by the Norwegian and the Royal Navies. And within a few days, they accepted the use of these equipment. So overall, we could say that in the case of the Kursk rescue missions, all the assets that were necessary to carry out a successful rescue were given. What was missing was not so much this technical innovation, it was a process innovation. There were no protocols at the time that would have allowed the Russian Navy to collaborate, to work together with any kind of NATO teams. It was very close to the time when the Cold War just ended and these protocols were just not in existence. So we needed innovation here, but that was a process innovation that was needed. The Chilean case presents us with the need for the technical innovation, the technologies that would have allowed rescuers to reach this refuge just didn't exist. We did have drilling technologies. What we didn't have was the accuracy, the necessary accuracy that was needed to find this little refuge at that huge depth. The experts compared that problem to it with a 95% drilling accuracy. That problem was akin to finding a needle in a haystack. So that accuracy innovation was really, really crucial. It had to be improvised during the time of these rescues. Now, stepping back a little bit, what is common in these situations that we can actually think of as more general features of crisis situations? So there's a huge level of complexity. We are operating technically complex systems or high reliability systems, complex technologies such as nuclear submarines, or complex processes such as mining at such depths, or we are talking about complex health systems. We have got resource constraints. You highlighted the importance of time. Time was a limited resource, is a limited resource when lives are at stake. In our current situation, we of course are feeling the capacity constraints of our healthcare systems and the budgetary constraints, or keeping those healthcare systems and the debilitated economies going. There is this issue of the difficulties of management are increased by the sheer number of people who are getting involved. We need experts, we need to talk to the families, we need to get involved the first responders, we need to talk to the media. There are many, many stakeholders here. When we talk about the current situation, those numbers are rising to the millions, if not the billions. We are all in it together. And because of this common involvement, and because of the peril to the lives involved, there is high emotion. We all feel emotional, we all feel under stress and anxious. And there is, of course, politics, and no more so than in the Russian Kursk submarine case, but there is politics today too. And there was politics in the Chilean mining case, but I will show you that factor was taken care of very effectively by the Chilean president. And there is, of course, the intense media coverage that you have already raised. What I would like to argue now is that crisis management under these circumstances has to have innovation at its core, and fast innovation, rapid innovation. Why is that? Because of the resource constraints, because of the situation that outstrips the resources that we currently have to deal with it. And in those situations, we have to be very creative, we have to be very inventive, we have to innovate. Okay, so let's talk first about time. Time is of the essence in these situations, and how that timeline unfolds gives every crisis its own character, its own flavor, and probably its own fate. So in the case of the Kursk, we are talking about a 10-day period in which everything happened. The accident, the announcement was delayed by a whole weekend. That has got political reasons, and it has got other reasons. The Russian Navy was desperately trying to save this submarine before the world learned about this event. And if they could have done this themselves, we would have probably never learned about it. But because they didn't manage to find and save the sailors, they ended up making an announcement on Monday morning, which immediately made this a global news item. On that morning, both the UK and Norway and the United States as well offered assistance. The United States offer was immediately rejected for political reasons, but the UK and Norway didn't have any bad relations with Russia at the time. So those offers of assistance were considered and eventually reluctantly accepted by Russia. So there followed a surge. A surge in a crisis situation is the gathering of all parties to the scene that could bear relevance to the outcome of this mission. And it's only when the parties all gathered together 1 week after the accident on a Saturday that they found that the issue that they are facing is not a technical one. Most of the discussions until that point were around two topics. Are they still alive? To which the answer was, yes, the Russian Navy has detected knocking from inside the Kursk, so we still think they might be alive. And do we have the right technical dimensions of the equipment that the Royal Navy are bringing so that it can hatch with the Kursk? After a week, it turned out the answer was yes. So in principle, everything was given for a successful rescue. The problem was that when these parties met, they realized they couldn't work with each other. There was just no previous protocol that would prescribe who is in charge for what, who needs to talk to whom, and in what order these different parties are going to deploy activities. So they had a couple of days to make this decision, but it took some time. And by the time they deployed the Norwegian divers for surveillance, and by the time they gave the go to the Royal Navy to deploy their kit, it was unfortunately too late. Mother Nature decided, and the hatch of the Kursk just opened, showing that that was the moment on that Monday, 21st of August, when the submarine got fully flooded. So it was tragically closed, but tragically failed, this mission. In the case of the Chilean miners, we also had this time pressure. If anyone is alive, they're not going to stay alive very long in that refuge, because there were only food supplies there, but only for a couple of days for 10 people. And here we are talking about 33 people. So there was a conceptual innovation that took place very early on. They realized that if they could make some communication with the refuge, then they could supply the survivors with food and water and gain time. And during that time, they could innovate the technology that was needed to create a wide enough borehole so that they could send down the rescue capsule and get these miners out. So now, as it happens, it took 17 days to find that refuge. And within that 70 days, a very important innovation took place. The mining company didn't have the right level of accuracy to make this a success, but a geologist, a Chilean geologist, invented a method that increased that accuracy sufficiently, and that technology was used. And in the second stage, when they were working on the rescue capsule and the borehole that would accommodate this, they were launching 3 different projects. So these projects were taking place in parallel, and it wasn't clear at all which one is going to get there, if any of them succeeds at all. But on the 13th of October, after 52 days of the second stage, so 69 days altogether, these miners were reached and brought to the surface. So let's step back from the cases and think about the innovation challenge that the managers or officers at the scene faced. So the big issue here is that we need to innovate in a situation that's really new to us in many ways. If not in nature, it's new to us in scale, or it's overwhelming because we have never had a plan. Like the Russian Navy never had a plan or protocol for working together with NATO executives. So an innovation process is needed. I'm going to be referring to a framework that was developed by Harvard colleagues Amy Edmondson, Dutch Leonard, and Faiza Rashid, and written up in a Harvard Business Review article in 2013, in which they were talking about the leadership lessons learned from the Chilean mine rescue. They divided the innovation process in 3 stages: envisioning, enrolling, and execution. And I'm going to use these 3 labels to give you the contrast between these 2 cases. And hopefully this framework will help us reflect about our own COVID situation as well, as we are aware that we need rapid innovation now as well, both for processes that would allow countries and companies and healthcare systems to work together with each other and with the private sector. We also need new technologies. We need new vaccines, and we need new testing technologies. So these technologies and innovations don't come out of the blue. They need to be nurtured, and leaders need to build processes that will eventually deliver them. And the nice bit about the Harvard authors' work is that they were able to capture the essence of this process in these 3 stages. So let me give you a few pointers. So envisioning, that stage is really about the moment and the process when the leader steps up and starts defining the story of the mission. It's about defining the priorities, about defining a vision where we want to end up. Now, this played out very differently in the Kursk situation as opposed to the Chilean situation. So what do we found in Russia at the time? We don't have much time to lay context, but enough to say President Putin was a new president at the time. He was so new that he didn't have much familiarity with the Russian Navy. And he was advised that the safest thing for him would be to stay away from this situation. Indeed, he was on holiday. It was August. So he could say that he is on holiday, and from that distance, he's monitoring the situation, but he's letting the admirals to take care of it. Now, we are talking about a very hierarchical and top-down system in which such an abdication of leadership was disastrous, because this sent mixed signals to the admirals, who themselves were very much divided about the purpose of this mission. Some of them wanted to save lives very clearly, but then there was an old guard there who considered the Kursk to be a top military secret for Russia, and they didn't want any NATO type person to get anywhere near to it. So for them, the key priority was to save the military secrets aboard the Kursk. And of course, there were other agendas, reputations at stake, particularly the reputation of the Russian military or Russian Navy at stake. There were also a lot of mixed signals given to the families by different experts and different military spokespeople about the survivor perspectives of those sailors. Some said they could survive for a week. The expert who designed the Kursk said the survival systems should keep people alive there for 2 weeks. So this is what kept everybody on edge. And even though these rescue parties came together on day 8, there was then a real moment of confusion, because some people who believed the 7-day estimate was correct, they already thought that the sailors would not be alive. But the ones who were hoping that they could last for 14 days, they wanted to carry on with the mission. But overall, we find a situation in which the priorities were not clear and were never clearly defined on the Russian side. In the Chilean mission, we had a president who, after a number of mining disasters that happened in Chile before, finally said enough is enough. This mining rescue has to be a success, and he took personal responsibility for it. He traveled to the site and declared that those miners have to be rescued, whatever it takes. And he created this real sense of purpose and possibility that this effort, even though the expert says the likelihood of success is 1%, that this effort could still be a success. He also reached out to the international community and declared and invited any kind of help, expertise that could bear relevance on the situation. So the leadership lessons that we would like to emphasize at this stage of innovation are around defining priorities. How do you do that? And it is really important to do that. As the Chilean president said, we will bring those men home dead or alive, sparing no expense. This is very clear. In today's situation, we of course find that there are competing priorities. Most countries have declared that we are saving lives. That's the first priority. Saving lives, saving the vulnerable. In the UK, saving the NHS, helping the NHS too. But of course, there is a competing priority now around saving livelihoods and saving economies. So how this is going to be defined and how we're going to switch between these priorities has got a lot to do with how we are going to exit from the current lockdown situation. The second point that comes out of this is the importance of crisis communications. What we learn from the literature is that leaders have to be brutally honest about the situation, no matter how grave it is. They need to acknowledge that. But at the same time, they have to offer a rational basis for optimism that the rescue, the mission could succeed. And it has to come with their emotional understanding of the stakeholders' predicament. So you can perhaps think about leaders who are doing this particularly well in our context, around you, in your companies or in your countries. So please use this opportunity to chat in and give us some leaders, some names of leaders whom you think are doing this particularly well.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll wait for a few of the answers to come in and I'll try and keep on top of them. Jacinda from New Zealand, I knew that would come up. Yes, thank you for that.
Well, on that note, I had her as well.
We've got a few, Angela Merkel coming up a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Governor Cuomo.
Yep. Very
We've
good.
got the president of Taiwan is getting several mentions, which is really great.
Great.
Hong Kong.
Thank you very much.
Krishna, your comment saying we need planned action. It would be interesting to know where you're based, and I guess what you're basing that on, what the context around your comment. That would be really interesting. India, thank you. Yeah, so Krishna is saying that they need planned action to prevent a long-term recession.
So we already have to talk about that second priority, which is currently taking a back seat, and start thinking about how we are going to switch to another priority, which is to save our economies. Okay, the second of the three challenges of innovation management is around creating a virtual organization on the hoof in these situations to deliver a successful rescue. And again, we're not going to go through in detail the cases now, but I wanted to highlight, if you just look at this screen, you will see there were completely opposing features of these two situations. So I'm going to focus more on the Chilean case, where the boundaries of these organizations were very inclusive. A lot of experts got involved, from NASA to geologists in Chile to Australian IT programmers. But it was selective as well. There was an incident command team that was screening all the offers coming to the scene. And they knew exactly what kind of expertise they needed, because they know where they were needed innovation. Then they set multiple teams in work to work in parallel. And they also had a separate team just to liaise with the families and the media, because they didn't want that to become a distraction to the experts who were working on the innovation. But also they considered these really important stakeholders to get proper attention. Now, the lessons that we draw based on research at this stage of the leadership challenge is the importance of valuing expertise, holding the experts close to the incident command team. Also, the importance of listening intently to outsiders, because in the Chilean case, it was a 24-year-old field engineer who came up with an idea that actually finally resulted in the successful technology. He had an idea that was untested, completely out of the left field, and it was the idea that won the day. It's really also important to listen to ideas independently of the formal position. So the fact that this 24-year-old young engineer had no formal position in the mining company didn't interfere with the fact that he got a fair hearing and he got the go-ahead for the testing. And of course, part of leadership is to be prepared for failures, to be prepared that not all the things that we are trying are going to be successful, and to create a discipline around it so that we can still go through with it. We can still put in that 99% perspiration, as Edison said, which is needed for innovation. So again, as you think about your own predicaments, do we see this happening in the COVID-19 context? Feel free to chat in.
Okay, I'm just scrolling to see some of the comments here. So just waiting for some of them to come in. Oh, it's kind of
Okay. Can you read out a few comments, Sam?
Oh, sorry, Misha, are you taking this one, or
yeah,
would you like me to?
I'm reading, but they seem to all sort of be getting jumbled up here. So,
oh,
so for time, yeah, I'm
yeah.
not really seeing any from this last
Okay,
one.
maybe we don't have time for this, but I'm really happy that you've got things to say, and hopefully we can save these chats and post those together with the presentation slides afterwards. What I would like to highlight here is, yeah, we are listening. We are starting to listen to experts the world around, and hopefully we will see more of that as this crisis unfolds. Okay, moving on to the final stage of innovation, which is the execution part. So what is it that managers have to do well to make sure that these ideas turn into successful innovation? We talked about how important it is to allow multiple innovation teams to experiment, to allow them to fail if the idea doesn't work, but learn from it and use that learning for the next trial. To do this in an environment where there is no blame game played, and to manage the stress that everybody is working under. So this is where we talk about the culture of innovation, and based on research, we see the paradoxical nature of it. And I would like to point back to Fitzgerald's comment about the difficulty of holding opposed ideas in mind. This is where that comes into relevance in the life of managers who have to foster a culture where innovation, yes, can be chaotic, but it still has to be focused. That's leadership's role, to give direction to it. Yes, innovation is playful, but there has to be some discipline around it, some processes. I'm an accounting professor, so there could be some KPIs around it that allow us to quickly decide when an idea is working and when an idea is not working. Valuing deep expertise on the one hand, but also valuing broad thinking boundary spanners, and all the while promoting high standards and tolerating the failure. So this looks a bit paradoxical, but that is the matter of leadership in crisis situations. It's also a matter of creating psychological safety and avoiding the blame game. And this is going to be crucial in the stage where we are with COVID, because the blame game is already starting. But it's not what is going to give us the innovation that we need. We need to give psychological safety to the innovators who are going to save us from this situation. We might go back to examples in the past. We are now living the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 13 rescue missions. And you may want to take a look at the story of this mission, which I actually reinforce the ideas that we have been talking through here. So we are now very close to closing this session. So I would like to open this up for questions from you, and maybe pose here.
Perfect. Thank you, Annette. So last time there was a bit of a delay and then all of the questions just dumped in. So we'll just give it a minute and see if they start to filter in. Who are the countries you hold up as doing it right?
It's too early to say that. When we are all through this, there are going to be very interesting research projects written about this crisis, but I think it's too early to give that judgment at the moment. But rest assured, I'm using these criteria that I presented to you to keep tab on the actions that some of these crisis management processes are, how these crisis management processes are unfolding. Yeah.
Right. There's a few more coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Go. Sorry. Here's one just about a personal. What do we personally do when it seems everything is out of our hands? So in the leadership framework that you've described, do you have any sort of tools about what
When
individuals can do?
Out of our, yes, so that's when you have to consult with others. So as was famously the case in the Apollo 13, when everything in the control room seemed to be out of control, the key question that was asked, what is it that is still working on that spacecraft? So when everything seems to be out of control, you might want to establish what is it that is still working. And then again, you need to constantly scan the environment of what is it that's different from how it used to be, because our plans and scripts will not work if the world has so radically changed. And in order to understand this new radically changed world, we need to scan. We need to scan the environment. So it's good to have an incident command team or a team that's engaged with the situation daily. And casting its net wide collects information from outside experts, from other countries' experience, and so on, from other companies' experience, and trying to get a situational awareness. And so the challenge here is to try to get that daily situational awareness, knowing that you won't know the full answers, but you can learn something every day. And then bring that knowledge to bear relevance of, okay, what is it that's still working for us? What is it that we can still do? So this is what we see in the little businesses around us in Oxford, the little restaurants that overnight changed into online delivery shops or pop-up farmer stores. You know, what is it? I cannot have any customers coming in, but I can still deliver. I could try to deliver, and so on.
Okay, here's another one. How do we arrive at a confident decision when multiple options are available, but only limited can be acted on?
Again, this is going to be a question of laying out the decision alternatives. So if you get enough knowledge about the multiple options, try to figure out almost on a cost benefit or risk return basis of what you can potentially hope to get from each. So like in the case of the Chilean, they had a few parameters that they had to vet each alternative through. The speed of drilling, the accuracy of drilling, the cost of drilling, even the cost was less of a constraint for them. And the reliability of that technology, has it been tested before or not? And so building quickly a scorecard, which is again an accounting system, an ad hoc scorecard or performance measurement system will help you differentiate between those alternatives and arrive at a decision, which is probably just going to be temporary. Or, you know, right now it looks like plan B is going to win, but plan A is still not rejected. So it's important to keep following up multiple plans up to the point when you see that one plan has given you the solution that you are looking for. That's the nature of innovation. It's full of multiplicities and redundancies up to the point when you find what you are looking for.
Great. So there's lots of questions coming in. I am just aware of time. One comment here, which I find interesting, is an individual saying, I remember watching TV about Kursk every day after school. It was so emotional, and I was studying in a Russian school at the time. So these examples do hit home for people and are relevant to the way it shaped their lives.
Well, I do hope we're going to teach this case study to you in more detail. In fact, both case studies in more detail in the coming MBA year. So this was just a little taster of the kind of issues that are raised by crisis and rescue type situations. And I brought these to you because of their special resonance for the COVID-19 world that we are finding ourselves in. But I hope that you're right about us coming through this by the end of the summer. And I hope that I will be able to meet you and welcome you at the Saïd Business School in the Michaelmas term. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Lots of comments here too, thanking you, Annette. So on that note, I would like to thank you for sharing your research and your expertise. It's fascinating to be able to compare and contrast real case studies from the past to what we are experiencing right now. So thank you for your expertise in the leadership framework and some tools that we can all think about going forward in our different roles of the situation. So thank you everyone for joining us. As mentioned, if you do have specific questions about your profile or the program or anything that the admissions and recruitment managers can help you out with, please do email the general inbox and we'll be sure to get back to your specific case. And to Annette, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and adjusting to this online platform. Really appreciate hearing from you in this format. So thank you, everybody, and I hope that you have a fantastic night. And thanks to Sam as well for helping moderate.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, everyone.